Greetings, I am Reverend Yue McCormick, Head Minister of Enryuzan, Perfect Dragon Mountain, Shinganji, True Vow Temple, of the Nichiren Shu Sangha of the San Francisco Bay Area. In this presentation of 4 parts, it is my goal to cover those things about the life and teachings of the historical Shakyamuni Buddha that Nichiren Shu expects its clergy to know. I feel that this might also be of interest to dedicated lay practitioners, as well as those who are curious about Buddhism and would like to know more about its founder and the basic teachings and practices that he taught. I will note that material appearing in red rather than black is material that is either not covered or not covered in detail in the book History and Teachings of Nichiren Buddhism, published by the Nichiren Shu Text Editorial Committee. This is material that I personally feel is important for Nichiren Buddhist practitioners to be familiar with, especially clergy and lay teachers. Now let's begin the 4th of the 4 parts, the final nirvana of the historical Buddha. The last year of the Buddha's life is recorded in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta and the Account of Travel Sutra. According to these, the Buddha began the last year of his life at Vulture Peak outside Rajagriha. He then spent his last rainy season in the village of Baluva near the city of Vaishali. There he became seriously ill. According to Dr. Metanando Bhikkhu, the Buddha's illness was a symptom of a very serious condition known as mesenteric infarction, which is a condition brought on by old age in which the artery that supplies blood to the small intestines is blocked. This causes an infarction or gangrene of the intestinal wall or mesentery. The condition is fatal if untreated by surgery, and one of the symptoms would be severe abdominal pains or angina. These other symptoms, indicative of mesenteric infarction, will appear later in the narrative of the Buddha's passing. Another stop on the Buddha's final journey was the mango grove belonging to Chunda the smith near the village of Pava. It was there that Chunda served the Buddha his last meal. This meal included something called Sukkara Madhava, which can be translated as either soft pork or as pig's delight. No one knows for sure what this was. It might have been pork, because the Buddha allowed monastics to accept meat as long as it was not seen, heard, nor suspected that an animal had been killed for their sake. On the other hand, it might have been a type of mushroom that pigs also like to eat. In any case, the Buddha tried some of this and sensed that something was wrong. Then the Lord said to Chunda, "Whatever is left over of the pig's delight, you should bury in a pit, because, Chunda, I can see none in this world, with its gods, devils, and Brahmas, in this generation with its ascetics and Brahmins, its princes and people who, if they were to eat it, could thoroughly digest it except the Tathagata." The grim irony here is that this would be the Buddha's last meal, and as we shall see, even he was not able to digest it. It has long been thought that the Buddha was a victim of food poisoning. If Sukkara Madhava was pork, then the pork was bad. If it was a mushroom dish, then poison mushrooms had been served by mistake. As has been mentioned, however, Dr. Metanando Bhikkhu has argued that it was not food poisoning after all, but mesenteric infarction that was what killed the Buddha. The Buddha's severe abdominal pains, or angina during the rainy season retreat in Baluva, signaled the onset of this condition. During his meal at the home of Chunda, the Buddha suffered a second angina attack, and at first thought the Sukkara Madhava was responsible. Food poisoning, however, would not be felt until at least a couple of hours after the meal, and not immediately. After the meal was finished, the Buddha gave a Dharma talk to his host and then took his leave. That is when other more severe symptoms occurred, and the Buddha realized that this was no mere food poisoning. Despite his great physical distress, however, the Buddha remained mindful and clearly aware, and as noted above, did not complain. The Buddha faced his death with great peace of mind, dignity, and acceptance. In fact, as we shall see, he showed great concern for the people around him, right until the very end. How the Buddha faced his own death is in itself a great inspiration. One of the people the Buddha was concerned about was Chunda, who had served the Buddha his last meal. The Buddha knew that the Sukkara Madhava could not be at fault for his condition, and even if it had been, there would have been no reason to blame Chunda. Rather than blame, Chunda should be honored for having been able to serve the Buddha's last meal. Though on his deathbed and in great pain, the Buddha instructed Ananda regarding Chunda, so that the smith would not blame himself for the Buddha's death. After resting in the mango grove by the river Kakuta, the Buddha was ready to move on to Kushinagara, the capital of Mala. Kushinagara was not a large town, but there it would be more likely that the Buddha could get more adequate care. There he lay down between 2 sal trees. on his right side with his legs atop each other and head pointing to the north. After he gave his final instructions, the Buddha entered into all the deep states of meditative absorption, moving on from there into the four attainments of space, consciousness, nothingness, and the realm of neither perception nor yet non-perception. He then shifted his consciousness back down to the first meditative absorption and then back up to the fourth, and from that point entered into parinirvana, or final nirvana, going beyond all suffering and pain forever. Here are some of the most important statements made by the Buddha during his final journey. Upon realizing that the Buddha was deathly ill at Valuva, Ananda said, "The only thing that was some comfort to me was the thought, the Lord will not attain final nirvana until he has made some statement about the order of monks." The implication being that the Buddha would not die soon because he had given no further instructions about what to do upon his passing. That is when the Buddha said, "But Ananda, what does the order of monks expect of me? I have taught the Dharma, Ananda, making no inner and outer. The Tathagata has no teacher's fist in respect of doctrines. If there is anyone who thinks I shall take charge of the order, or the order should refer to me, let him make some statement about the order, but the Tathagata does not think in such terms. So why should the Tathagata make a statement about the order?" Here the Buddha informs Ananda that there are no esoteric teachings. He has held nothing back. There are no further instructions, and in fact no designated successors to lead the Sangha. We should keep this in mind when reflecting upon Nichiren's admonitions in regard to esoteric forms of Buddhism and the view that one must take refuge with a guru in order to practice the Dharma. The Buddha then gives the following instruction. "Therefore, Ananda, you should live as islands unto yourselves, being your own refuge, with no one else as your refuge, with the Dharma as an island, with the Dharma as your refuge, with no other refuge. And how does a monk live as an island unto himself, with no other refuge? Here, Ananda, a monk abides contemplating the body as body, earnestly, clearly aware, mindful, and having put away all hankering and fretting for the world, and likewise with regard to feelings, mind, and mind objects. That, Ananda, is how a monk lives as an island unto himself, with no other refuge. And those who now, in my time or afterwards, live thus, they will become the highest, if they are desirous of learning." We should keep this in mind when reflecting upon Nichiren's admonitions in regard to Pure Land Buddhism and the view that one must take refuge in other power in order to practice the Dharma. Upon his deathbed in Kushinagara, the Buddha accepted one last disciple named Subhadra. It was to him that the Buddha said, "In whatever Dharma or discipline the Noble Eightfold Path is not found, no ascetic is found of the first, the second, the third, or fourth grade, but such ascetics can be found of the first, second, third, and fourth grade in a Dharma and discipline where the Noble Eightfold Path is found." The Buddha then gave the following instruction to Ananda. "Ananda, it may be that you think, the teacher's instruction has ceased, now we have no teacher. It should not be seen like this, Ananda, for what I have taught and explained to you as Dharma and discipline will, at my passing, be your teacher." We should keep this in mind when reflecting upon Nichiren's admonitions in regard to Zen Buddhism and the view that one must seek a teaching outside the Buddha's instructions in the sutras in order to practice the Dharma. The Buddha also told Ananda, "If they wish, the Sangha may abolish the minor rules after my passing." We should keep this in mind when reflecting upon Nichiren's admonitions in regard to the disciplined school of Buddhism and the view that one must follow the precepts laid down by the historical Buddha in ancient India in order to practice the Dharma. The very last words of the Buddha were, "Now, monks, I declare to you, all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. Strive on untiringly." Upon learning of the Buddha's final nirvana, the people of Mala were distraught, but eventually they gathered together in the Sal Grove to pay their respects to the Buddha with perfume, incense, dancing, and music. In fact, they set up tents and kept putting off the cremation until a full week of dancing and singing in honor of the Buddha had gone by. At the end of the week, they prepared the body and after some deliberation decided to carry it to the north of Kushinagara. Then going in through the north gate, they processed to the middle of the town and then out through the east gate. Ananda then instructed the Mallas in what to do, just as the Buddha had told him. First they wrapped the body in linen, and then wrapped it again in teased cotton wool, and then in a new cloth. This was repeated 500 times. Then they placed the body in an iron vat that was then covered with an iron pot. They then prepared to cremate the body on a scented funeral pyre. The Mallas discovered that they were unable to light the funeral pyre. Aniruddha informed them that the gods are preventing them from doing so until Mahakāshyapa arrived. When Mahakashyapa did arrive, he circumambulated the funeral pyre 3 times. Then he uncovered the Buddha's feet and paid homage with full prostrations. When this was done, the pyre ignited by itself. Once the body was cremated and the fires had burned out, the Mallas honored the relics for another week with more music, singing, dancing, and the offering of incense and garlands. Once the word got out that the Buddha had passed away and that his relics were in Kushinagara, the surrounding kingdoms all laid claim to the relics. King Ajatashatru Magadha, the Lichavis, the Shakyas, whose survivors had built a new Kapilavastu, the Bulayas of Alakapa, the Koliyas of Ramagama, the Brahmin of Vetapudipa, and the Mallas of Pava all demanded the relics. On hearing all this, the Mallas of Kushinagara addressed the crowd, saying, "The Lord passed away in our district. We will not give away any share of the Lord's remains." At this time, the Brahmin Dona addressed the crowd in this verse: "Listen, lords, to my proposal. Forbearance is the Buddha's teaching. It is not right that strife should come from sharing out the best of men's remains. Let's all be joined in harmony and peace, and friendship sharing our portions 8. Let stupas far and wide be put up, that all may see and gain in faith." Then Dona divided the remains of the Buddha. Dona kept the urn for himself. A little later, the Mauryas of Palavana requested remains so that they too could build a stupa, but the remains had already been divided. Instead, they had to be content with the embers from the fire. Then each of those who had received relics, and also Dona and the Mauryas, built a stupa so that there were 10 in all. These would become centers of pilgrimage where people could come and honor the Buddha and take faith in the fact that a Buddha had come and taught the Dharma and established the Sangha, so that it would be possible for all people thereafter to join the Sangha, practice the Dharma, and attain the enlightenment of the Buddha. More than a century later, King Ashoka further divided the relics and is said to have distributed them among 84,000 pagodas throughout his realm. In 1898, W.C. Pepe, a British engineer and landowner, discovered a pagoda near the Indian border with Nepal and a jar with an inscription that indicated it contained the relics of the Buddha that were given to the Shakyas. The inscription on the jar reads, "This container holds the relics of Shakyamuni Buddha. It belongs to the people of the glorious Shakya clan and their sisters, wives, and children." When did the Buddha die? There are several dates proposed. Since the sutras say that the Buddha died at the age of 80, these dates were also used to determine in what year the Buddha was born. The traditional East Asian chronology that Nichiren and his contemporaries accepted was based upon the record of wonders in the Book of Jo. According to this work, the infant Siddhartha was born on the 8th day of the 4th month of 1029 before the Common Era. The record of wonders is no longer extant, but appeared in the early 6th century China. It was much quoted in other works as a source of information about the life of Shakyamuni Buddha. Confucians saw the early years of the Zhou dynasty as a golden age, so making the Buddha's life coincide with its establishment was a way of underscoring the auspiciousness of the Buddha's appearance and teachings. In addition, this was long before the time of Lao Tzu, and thereby refuted the Taoist claim that Lao Tzu could have been the Buddha's teacher. Going by this date, the Buddha died in 949 BCE. Since the former and middle ages of the Dharma were only supposed to last 1,000 years each, according to some accounts, Nichiren and his contemporaries believed that the latter age of the Dharma had begun in the year 1052. The dates 624 to 544 before the Common Era for the Buddha come from the Ceylonese long chronology, based upon 2 historical records from Sri Lanka, the Dipavamsa and the Mahavamsa. The Chronicle of the Island, or Dipavamsa, is a verse account in Pali written in the 4th century of the history of the first 3 Buddhist councils, the introduction of Theravada Buddhism to Sri Lanka by Mahendra in the 3rd century BCE, and continuing until the end of the reign of Mahasena in the early 4th century. The Great Chronicle, or Mahavamsa, is a verse account in Pali written in the 5th century. It is a more elaborate and coherent account than that of the earlier Chronicle of the Island. According to these chronicles, the Buddha passed away 218 years before the coronation of King Ashoka. The problem is that the date they assume for the coronation of King Ashoka is around 60 years too early. The corrected long chronology maintains the claim that the Buddha passed away 218 years before the coronation of King Ashoka, but set the date for the coronation as circa 269, before the Common Era. This chronology is corroborated by the dotted record which came to China through the translator Samgabhadra. In 489 of the Common Era, in Canton, he claimed to put the 975th dot on a copy of the Vinaya. His claim was that these dots had been made in the record every year since the first Buddhist council. This would set the date for the Buddha's final nirvana as 486, before the Common Era. The modern chronology shifts the date of Ashoka's coronation to circa 265. The Sarvastivada Vinaya gives dates of 160 or 116 years between the final nirvana and the coronation of Ashoka. The latter dates were accepted by the Japanese scholar Hajime Nakamura. In 488 to 489, the monk Sanghabhadra made a partial translation into Chinese of the Pali Samanta Pasadika, a 4th or 5th century Mahavihara commentary on the Pali Vinaya. Finally, there is the Indian short chronology, found in other Vinaya texts that say it was only 100 years, a dubiously round number, between the final nirvana and the coronation. We should also note that the Ceylonese long chronology may be dating 218 years before the accession of Chandragupta I in circa 326 BCE, whereas the corrected long chronology dates from the accession of Ashoka if it was in 269 BCE. The modern chronology dates from the accession of Ashoka if it was in 265 BCE. It all hinges on when Ashoka's coronation was and how much time passed between that event and the Buddha's final nirvana. The first of the Buddhist councils was held in the Cave of the Seven Leaves outside Rajagriha a few weeks after Shakyamuni Buddha's final nirvana. This council is sometimes called the Council of the 500, or the Council of Rajagriha. It was presided over by Mahakashyapa with 500 arhats in attendance. At the council, Ananda recited the sutras, while Upali recited the Vinaya. Therefore, 2 of the 3 baskets of the Tripitaka began their oral transmission at this time, the Sutra basket and the Vinaya basket. Some Buddhist traditions claim that the Abhidharma, the 3rd basket, was set forth at the first Buddhist council. However, scholarly consensus is that the Abhidharma treatises began to appear around 300 before the Common Era. The second council was held in Vaishali around 100 years after the Buddha's final nirvana. It was attended by 700 monks. There are different accounts of the issues that led to this council. According to the Vinaya of the Theravada, a monk named Yashas requested the convocation of the second Buddhist council to resolve the issue of the 10 deviant rules followed by monks in Vriji. It was determined by the council that all 10 points were in violation of the Vinaya. According to the great exegesis of Abhidharma treatise, the council was convened to refute the 5 teachings of Mahadeva. In the Theravada account, the refutation of Mahadeva had to do with a second meeting that occurred 35 years after the second council. At this meeting, the majority of monks who agreed with Mahadeva established the Mahasangika sect, or school, while the minority who condemned his 5 false teachings established the Stavira Nikaya. The Wheel of the Formations of Divisions of the Doctrine treatise, however, states that Mahadeva was not involved with the Second Council, but was the founder of the Chaityaka subsect of the Mahasangika over 200 years later. Because of this split, only the first 2 councils are recognized by all Buddhists. The third council was held at Pataliputra during the reign of Emperor Ashoka in order to end corruption in the Sangha. It was presided over by a Staviravadan monk named Mogali Putatisa. According to the Wheel of the Formations of Divisions of the Doctrine treatise by Vasamitra, a 2nd century monk of the Sarvastivada school, 18 schools in Nikaya Buddhism developed in India by the end of the 1st century BCE. These were 18 schools consisting of the Mahasangika and its 8 sub-schools, and the Stavira Nikaya with its 10 sub-schools. The 8 sub-schools of the Mahasangika were the Ekavyavaharika, Lokottaravada, Kaukutika, Bahushrutya, Prajnaptivada, Chaityaka, Aparashaila, and the Uttarashaila. The 10 sub-schools of the Stavira Nikaya were the Vatsiputriya, the Dharmotarya, the Bhadrayanya, Samitya, Shanagarika, Sarvastivada, Sautrantika, Mahishasaka, Kashyapya, and the Dharmaguptaka. There are 20 Nikaya schools of the Mahasangika and the Stavira Nikaya, the latter under the name Haimavata, are also counted. Of these schools, the following should be noted. Mahasangika means the Great Assembly. The yellow areas on the map indicate where the Mahasangika and its sub-schools were still influential in the 7th century, according to Xuanzang. Mahayana Buddhism is believed to have originated first, though not exclusively, among the Mahasanghikas. Of the Stavira Nikaya, the Vatsiputriya and its 4 sub-schools were derided as the Pudgalavada, or personalists, who contradicted the teaching of non-self. This is because the Vatsiputriya taught that there is an inexpressible person that is neither the same as nor different from the 5 aggregates. Nietzsche then refers to Vatsiputriya, the founder of this school, as someone who slandered the Dharma. The dark green area on the map indicates where the Vatsiputriya and its sub-schools were still influential in the 7th century, according to Xuanzang. Another important Stavira Nikaya sub-school was the Sarvastivada, which means all exists school. They were so named because they taught that dharmas are ultimately real and actually exist throughout the 3 times of past, present, and future, though they are only manifest in the present moment. The red area on the map indicates where the Sarvastivada and its sub-school, the Sautrantika, were still influential in the 7th century, according to Xuanzang. Sautrantika means followers of the sutras. They were the Gandhara branch of the Sarvastivada who did not accept the Abhidharma treatises as having the same authority as the sutras. They also had other doctrinal disagreements with the Vaibhashika branch of the Sarvastivada in Kashmir. The Sautrantika believe that dharmas only exist in the present moment and do not persist through time. Another important Stavira Nikaya sub-school was the Dharmaguptaka, which means the followers of Dharmagupta. The Vinaya of the Dharmaguptaka survives in Chinese translation as the 4-part discipline. The Dharmaguptaka Vinaya became the most prominent ordination lineage of monks and nuns throughout East Asia. The gray area on the map indicates where the Dharmaguptaka was still influential in the 7th century, according to Xuanzang. The Dharmaguptaka, Mahishasaka, and the Kashyapya sub-schools of the Stavira Nikaya were all considered to be branches of the Vibhajyavada, the distinctionist school. There was also a 4th, not listed by Vasamitra, called the Tamaraparniya, or the Mahavihara Vasans, that survives today as the Theravada. The orange area on the map indicates where these Vibhajyavada schools, except the Dharmaguptaka, were still influential in the 7th century, according to Xuanzang. Note that the doctrinal critiques of Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, and others seem to have been directed mostly at the Sarvastivada and Sautrantika in the north. Also note that none of these schools are Mahayana. There were no distinctly Mahayana schools in India, but Mahayana followers were ordained in these schools. In fact, Mahayana monastics throughout China, Korea, and Vietnam are still ordained using the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya, and monks in Tibet are ordained using the Vinaya of the Mula Sarvastivada, a sub-school of the Sarvastivada that was based in Mathura and was established by at least the 2nd century of the Common Era. With that, I bring the 4th part of this 4-part presentation of the life and teachings of the historical Shakyamuni Buddha to a close. I hope that this presentation was helpful and informative and will help to enrich your faith in and practice of Nichiren Buddhism.